From a very young age, I could sense the emotional distance between my parents and me. Although we were financially comfortable, my parents, particularly my mother, Esther, and father, Frank, maintained a detached relationship with me that felt less like family and more like an arrangement of obligation. I can't recall ever feeling truly seen or heard in my household. My mother was a more subtle one, quiet but firm, while my father was a more outspoken figure in the family. Their interactions with me always felt transactional, their affection conditional, and their priorities elsewhere. My parents' life was driven by social status, which wasn't immediately clear to me as a child. It wasn't until I reached my teenage years that I began to understand the subtle signals they gave that I wasn't as important as their social circle or their carefully curated life. They constantly emphasized the importance of being independent, often saying things like, "We want you to be self-sufficient. We don't want to spoil you." This message was drilled into me so much that I accepted it as fact. In hindsight, their insistence on my independence was less about preparing me for the real world and more about shielding themselves from responsibility. One of the clearest memories of this emotional detachment came when I was in high school in my junior year, just before college applications. I had expected that, like many of my friends, my parents would step in to help fund my education. The reality, however, was different. My father, in his usual direct and cold manner, called me into the living room one evening, and that's when it began. He started with a speech, one that was clearly rehearsed. He told me that my mother and he had been talking, and they had decided that they couldn't afford to support me through college. This was their reasoning. They had plans for their own future, their own retirement, and they were not willing to divert funds to my education. My mother, who had been silent up until this point, spoke next, saying that I was almost 18 and needed to learn to take care of myself. At the time, I was crushed. I had always been a diligent student, doing my best to maintain high grades while also working part-time jobs. I had always wanted to make them proud, to somehow prove that I was worth their investment. But instead of support, I received their cold, pragmatic decision to abandon me in a crucial moment of my life. Still, I wasn't entirely without options. I had been planning for this, and I had already had a conversation with my Uncle Kevin a few months before. Uncle Kevin and Aunt Donna, my father's older brother and his wife, had always been more present in my life than my parents. I spent weekends at their house as a child, and they were the ones who always made me feel loved and cared for. They were far more than just family. They were the kind of people who treated me as their own child. They were kind, supportive, and never made me feel like I was a burden. When I reached out to Uncle Kevin, I expected nothing more than his guidance on how to co-sign a student loan. Instead, he surprised me by saying, "Don't worry about the loans, kid. Donna and I will take care of your tuition. Just focus on your studies." That was a turning point in my life. Aunt Donna and Uncle Kevin had already helped my cousin Jeremy, their son, through college, so they had the financial resources to support me. Despite their wealth, they never flaunted it or made me feel small for needing their help. They told me repeatedly that they wanted to see me succeed and that family takes care of each other. They even went so far as to tell me that I could repay them once I got a job after graduation, but they weren't expecting anything. Their kindness felt genuine, and I felt like I finally had people in my corner who truly cared about me for who I was. Fast forward to the present, graduation day was approaching. The university where I'd been studying, a well-regarded business school, was about to hold a ceremony in a large auditorium, but there was a strict limit of 4 tickets per student. My graduating class was huge, and the auditorium couldn't accommodate everyone who wanted to attend. I bought 3 tickets, and after some thought, I invited Uncle Kevin and Donna and my cousin Jeremy. I didn't even think to invite my parents. I hadn't spoken much with them in recent years. While I still went home for holidays, our interactions had become increasingly strained. They were always busy with their friends, hosting dinner parties, and spending money on things I didn't understand, while I felt like I was becoming more and more of an afterthought in their lives. At the time, I didn't expect them to care about the graduation. Our relationship had been distant for so long, and I had come to accept that it was just the way it was. But then came the phone call. It started with my mother calling to make small talk about graduation. At first, I thought nothing of it. But then my father called shortly after, and I immediately felt a knot in my stomach. "So, have you decided who you're inviting to the graduation ceremony?" he asked, his voice slightly trembling with an odd tone. I told him that I'd invited Uncle Kevin, Aunt Donna, and Jeremy. There was silence on the other end, and then my mother's voice, sharp and filled with disbelief, came through. "You didn't invite your own parents?" I tried to explain the limited ticket situation, but my father cut me off, his voice rising in anger. He accused me of making them look like fools in front of their friends. They had been bragging about my success, and now they would be humiliated if they didn't attend. That was when I lost it. All the years of resentment and neglect came flooding out. I yelled at them, accusing them of never being there for me, of prioritizing their social lives over me. I told them how they had made it clear to me years ago that I was on my own and had to take care of myself. The argument escalated quickly, and I ended up cutting ties with them. I hung up the phone, shaking with fury and sadness. My hands were trembling as I blocked their numbers. I was done. 2 days later, I received an email from my father, long and filled with justifications and thinly veiled accusations. He claimed that they had done the best they could for me and that they had raised me to be independent. He begged me to unblock them and even requested a graduation ticket. He swore that they wouldn't share any photos on social media and promised to be on their best behavior. I didn't respond. The next few days were filled with tension. I tried to focus on graduation preparations and left the situation with my parents behind me. But then disaster struck. My parents went on a social media rampage, posting hateful, rambling accusations about me. They called me ungrateful and claimed that I had demanded their financial help, as if they had ever offered it. They accused my aunt and uncle of manipulating me, and even used the painful story of my aunt's miscarriage to shame them. The things they wrote were untrue, malicious, and disgusting. I stood outside the restaurant after graduation, reading through the screenshots sent to me by relatives, my stomach churning in disbelief. Uncle Kevin, sensing the severity of the situation, took immediate action. He called a lawyer and had a formal cease and desist letter sent to my parents, threatening legal action for defamation. Initially, my father tried to argue and defend his actions, but when he realized Uncle Kevin was serious, the posts were quickly deleted. My parents didn't apologize, though. They never do. Despite the pain and frustration, I had to focus on what really mattered. My graduation, the love and support I had received from my aunt, uncle, and cousin. After graduation, I found a job and moved into my own apartment, marking the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The transition from living with my aunt and uncle to living on my own wasn't easy, but it felt like a step forward in reclaiming my independence. It was strange at first. My new apartment felt quiet and lonely, but I soon made it my own, decorating it with thrifted furniture and posters that made me feel at home. My parents, however, continued to live in their bubble. I heard through family members that they were going on with their lives, pretending as if nothing had happened. But I had no desire to re-enter that world. I was slowly healing and focusing on the future. I also began seeing a therapist at the suggestion of Uncle Kevin. At first, I was hesitant. I had always been a private person, and I didn't want to burden anyone with my feelings. But after talking to my therapist, I realized that I needed to process the trauma my parents had caused me. It was hard, but necessary. Months later, I received another email from my parents. This time, they claimed they had been seeing a family counselor and wanted to meet with me to discuss our issues. They offered to forgive me for my behavior if I agreed to meet them in person. I didn't respond. I had no desire to relive the past with them. A second email came shortly after, this one filled with darker accusations and manipulations, including a rehashing of the miscarriage lies. I couldn't bring myself to open it fully. It was a final straw. I blocked their email address, once and for all. I've moved forward with my life. I have a job I'm proud of, a place of my own, and a newfound peace with myself. I still see my aunt and uncle regularly, and they continue to be my emotional rock. My parents, on the other hand, remain the same, absorbed in their superficial world, pretending everything is fine while ignoring the damage they've caused. I've come to accept that some things will never change. I've made peace with my decision to cut them out of my life. Story 2. This is a heart-wrenching story of betrayal, family struggles, and finding healing. The protagonist, a young woman, referred to as OP, shares her journey being unjustly kicked out of her family home after her sister, Bella, fabricated a story about her involvement in selling drugs. OP's life was turned upside down as a result of this lie, leading to years of separation from her family. But eventually, she rebuilt her life with the help of friends, a supportive partner, and her own resilience. OP's childhood was shaped by her family's intense focus on appearances and achievement. Her father, Benjamin, was a successful and respected insurance executive, while her mother, Olivia, was a biology professor known for being the ideal maternal figure. From a young age, Opie and her sister Bella were conditioned to meet their parents' expectations. These expectations were not about love or emotional connection, but about perfection and the appearance of success. Bella, being 4 years older than Opie, embodied everything their parents wanted. She excelled academically, socially, and professionally. She was a golden child, the one who brought praise and admiration from everyone around her. In contrast, Opie was more reserved, quieter, and had interests that didn't align with her parents' strict definition of success. She loved literature and chose to major in English, a decision that was met with disdain from her parents, who did not see it as a practical or prestigious choice. Nevertheless, Opie tried to navigate their disapproval, staying within the boundaries set by her parents in order to avoid direct conflict. Despite these differences, Opie looked up to Bella. She admired her success, wishing she could live up to the high standards set by their family. She never imagined that Bella would turn against her in such a devastating way. 6 years ago, everything changed. Opie was 20, still in college, and trying to plan her future when Bella asked for her help in covering up a risky situation. Bella had gotten involved with some shady people and found herself in a predicament that could damage her reputation and her career. She asked Opie to provide her an alibi and lie to their parents about her involvement in these situations. Opie felt uncomfortable and uneasy about this request, especially because Bella's situation seemed dangerous and unethical. Opie refused to lie for her, explaining that she didn't want to take any risks that could jeopardize her own future. Bella's reaction to Opie's refusal was extreme. She was enraged and warned Opie that if she didn't help, she would regret it. At the time, Opie thought it was just a moment of anger and that Bella would eventually calm down. But in hindsight, this moment was the beginning of a deep rift between them. Soon after, Bella began to spread a vicious lie about Opie. She accused Opie of selling drugs in college, a claim that Opie knew was completely false. Opie had never used or sold drugs, and the accusation made her stomach churn. But Bella spoke so convincingly that their parents believed her without question. Benjamin's reaction was swift and unforgiving. He didn't give Opie a chance to explain. His fury was overwhelming, and he seemed to believe that Opie was guilty without needing any proof. Olivia, though quieter, expressed her disappointment and anger through silence. She didn't offend Opie. Instead, she looked at her with disapproval, as if she had failed to live up to her parents' expectations. Bella, meanwhile, stood to the side, expressionless, watching as her parents cast Opie out of the house. Opie was thrown out that day, with no chance to explain herself. She was cut off from the family, left with nothing, unable to afford college on her own. She had to drop out and find a way to survive. For the next few months, she bounced from couch to couch, relying on the kindness of friends while struggling to make ends meet. After being abandoned by her family, Opie hit rock bottom. It felt like her future had been stolen from her in an instant. However, she didn't give up. She started working a waitressing job to save money and slowly pieced her life back together. She enrolled in college again, this time part-time, and took on multiple jobs to afford her education. It wasn't easy, but she was determined to prove to herself that she could succeed on her own. Throughout this period, Opie found a group of friends who became her chosen family. These friends saw her for who she truly was, someone who had been unfairly wronged but still had a bright future ahead. They offered her the support and encouragement that her biological family had failed to provide. With their help, Opie regained her self-esteem and sense of worth, and she eventually graduated, securing a stable job that allowed her to build a life she could be proud of. She also met Mark, a kind, understanding man who became her fiancé. Mark accepted Opie's past without judgment. When Opie shared the story of her family's betrayal, Mark didn't pity her. He simply listened and reassured her that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who loved and cared for you, regardless of the past. For the first time in years, Opie felt loved and accepted. Mark was the stability she had always longed for, and with him, she began to truly believe that she didn't need her parents' approval to be complete. As Opie's wedding day approached, memories of her family resurfaced. She hadn't seen her parents in 6 years, and part of her wondered if it was time to give them a chance to make amends. But every time she thought about it, bitter memories flooded her mind. Her father's cold rejection, her mother's silence, and her sister's treacherous betrayal. She struggled to reconcile the desire for closure with the emotional scars that still lingered. Then one day, she received a message from her father. He informed her that Olivia was seriously ill and wanted to see her before it was too late. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the past. It was as if everything that had happened over the years had been erased, and Opie was expected to just forgive and forget for the sake of her mother's health. In addition to her father's message, Opie received a barrage of texts from relatives she hadn't heard from in years. They criticized her for not inviting her parents to the wedding, urging her to let go of the past. The hypocrisy of their messages angered Opie. These were the same people who hadn't been there for her when she was almost homeless, yet they expected her to include her parents in one of the happiest days of her life. Mark, ever supportive, encouraged Opie to ignore the texts and focus on what made her happy. He reminded her that her wedding day should be about her and him, not about unresolved family issues. Despite Mark's reassurance, Opie couldn't shake the feeling that if she didn't let her parents back in, she would regret it later. But she couldn't ignore the pain of the past either. She was torn between wanting peace and protecting herself from further harm. After weeks of deliberation, Opie finally made the decision to visit her family. Her mother's illness weighed heavily on her heart, and she knew that if she didn't make peace with her now, she might never get the chance. When she arrived at her childhood home, it felt strange and foreign. Nothing had changed. The house was the same, but the memories it held were painful. Opie found her mother sitting by the window, looking frail and exhausted. For the first time in years, Opie saw her mother not as the authoritative figure she had always tried to please, but as a human being, someone who had made mistakes. Her mother apologized sincerely, admitting that she had failed Opie and that she regretted not reaching out sooner. Opie was moved by her mother's words. For the first time, she felt her mother understood the pain she had caused. But when her father entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. He didn't apologize or acknowledge the hurt he had caused. Instead, he dismissed Opie's feelings, telling her that she needed to let go of the past for the sake of the family. His attitude was unchanged, and Opie felt a familiar sense of helplessness. When Opie asked about Bella, her father's response was that she couldn't make it. This only reinforced Opie's belief that Bella was avoiding responsibility for her actions. The visit left Opie feeling conflicted. While her mother's apology gave her some sense of closure, her father's refusal to acknowledge the past and Bella's absence reminded her of the deep scars her betrayal had left. She left the house with a sense of unease, unsure of what the future held. In the end, Opie decided not to invite Bella to the wedding. She didn't want to cause unnecessary turmoil or open old wounds. She invited her mother, knowing that she had made an effort to repair their relationship, but chose to keep her distance from Bella and her father for the time being. The wedding day was quiet and intimate. Opie and Mark celebrated their love, and Opie felt a sense of peace, knowing that she had made the right decision for herself. But just 2 months later, Opie's mother passed away. She died quietly, surrounded by family. Though it was a painful loss, Opie found solace in the fact that she had been there for her mother in her final days. At the funeral, Bella caused a scene, demanding to know why she wasn't included in the wedding. Her outburst disrupted the ceremony, and it was a final straw for Opie's father, who told Bella to leave. This confrontation, though painful, brought Opie and her father closer. They may not be close, but there was a sense of mutual respect and understanding that had been missing for years. In the end, Opie realized that forgiveness wasn't about reconciling with her family. It was about letting go of the anger and pain that had held her back for so long. She didn't need her parents' approval to live a fulfilling life, and she didn't need to invite Bella back into her life to find happiness. Now, Opie is focused on building her future with Mark, her chosen family, and a lesson she learned from her painful past. She's found peace in moving forward and leaving behind the toxic relationships that once defined her. Story 3. David, a 37-year-old man, had built a life with Emily, a woman he adored and had been married to for the past 10 years. Together, they had created a stable home where they raised Josh, Emily's son from a previous relationship. The love David had for Emily was undeniable, and the affection he felt for Josh was no different. Josh, now 14, had known David as his father for nearly a decade, a role David embraced fully. Despite the challenges that came with blending families, David and Emily made it work. The early years of their relationship were marked by challenges, but also growth. David had met Emily when she was already a single mother. She was doing everything in her power to raise Josh and provide him with the life he deserved. Despite the fact that Josh's biological father, Mark, had left when Emily was pregnant. From the beginning, Emily was open with David about her situation. Mark's abandonment had left scars, but Emily had soldiered on, doing everything she could to make sure Josh had a stable life. David knew that this would be a package deal, and from the moment he met Josh, he loved him as if he were his own. Josh, just a toddler when David entered his life, had taken to him quickly. David had no hesitation in stepping into the fatherly role, and over time, Josh began to call him Dad, a title David wore with pride. Their life was far from perfect, but it worked for them. They established routines, traditions, and moments of joy, from Josh's soccer games to family dinners and outings. David and Emily balanced their work lives with parenting, helping Josh with homework, and teaching him values that they hoped would stay with him for life. Despite the occasional tension, particularly regarding the subject of Josh's biological father, their relationship had flourished, with both of them committed to making their family work. Over the years, Emily and David had discussed Josh's biological father. They had agreed that the truth would be shared with Josh when he turned 20, believing that by then, he would be mature enough to handle complexity of the situation. They didn't want to disrupt his childhood by introducing such a difficult truth too early. Emily was supportive of this decision, and they carried on with their family life, giving Josh a sense of security and love, unaware of how this stable world would soon come crashing down. The reality of betrayal hit David one afternoon in the form of a phone call from his old college friend, Mike. Mike and David had known each other for years, though they hadn't kept in close touch in recent times. His tone, however, was serious when he asked if they could meet for a drink. Sensing the urgency, David agreed to meet him after work. They sat at a small bar in the downtown area, a place that had been their go-to in their younger days. Mike's expression was tense as he looked at David, his eyes full of sympathy. After some small talk, Mike came to the point. "David, I need to tell you something, and it's not easy, but you have the right to know," he said. David's heart began to race. "What is it?" he asked, already fearing the worst. "I've seen Emily with another man," Mike revealed, "more than once. I didn't want to believe it, but I've seen her leaving a hotel with him. I'm sorry, man. She's been having an affair." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Betrayal, anger, disbelief, these emotions hit David like a freight train. Emily, the woman he had loved and trusted for years, had been unfaithful. He couldn't fathom it. Mike's words echoed in his head as he left the bar, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fury. He couldn't bring himself to believe it, but the look on Mike's face told him this wasn't some misunderstanding. It was real. When he got home, his heart was heavy with the weight of the information. Emily was in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing was wrong. Her normalcy only fueled his anger. David couldn't hold it in anymore. He stormed into the kitchen and confronted her. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice trembling with barely controlled rage. She looked up, surprised by the tension in his voice. "What's wrong?" she asked, clearly unaware of what was coming. "Are you having an affair?" he asked bluntly, watching her carefully for any sign of guilt or denial. For a moment, Emily stood still, stunned. Then, as if the realization hit her. She shook her head, denying it. No, of course not. Where is this coming from? Don't lie to me, Emily, David shouted. Mike saw you. He saw you with another man. Leaving a hotel. For God's sake, just tell me the truth. Her face turned pale, and for a moment, she said nothing. But then, with tears welling up in her eyes, she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. David, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. It's been going on for a few months. David felt his heart shatter. A mistake? He repeated, his voice rising. Months of betrayal reduced to a single word? A mistake. His anger surged again, and he had to fight to keep from losing control. Emily broke down in sobs, but David couldn't find it in himself to comfort her. The world around him seemed to crumble. Everything he had believed in, everything he had trusted, had been a lie. I need to get out, David muttered, unable to stay another second in the house. He stormed out, needing time to process the crushing truth. David drove aimlessly for hours, trying to wrap his mind around what had just happened. He thought of the life they had built, the promises they had made, and most importantly, Josh. David realized he could no longer keep this secret. His son deserved the truth, no matter how painful it was. The thought of keeping this hidden from Josh any longer was unbearable. By the time David returned home, the house was eerily quiet. Emily was still in the kitchen, but her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked up at David, hope flickering in her gaze. But he couldn't meet her eyes. Instead, he went straight to Josh's room, determined to break the news to him. He knocked gently on Josh's door. Josh, can I come in? David asked, his voice calm but heavy. Sure, Dad, Josh replied, his voice muffled as he pulled out his earbuds. David entered and sat down on the edge of Josh's bed. Josh looked up, sensing that something was wrong. What's up? He asked, noticing the gravity in his father's demeanor. David took a deep breath, trying to find the words. Josh, there's something really important I need to tell you. It's not going to be easy to hear, but you need to know the truth. Josh's eyes widened, and he took off his earbuds, concern etching his face. Your mom, she'd been seeing someone else, David continued. It's true. She admitted it to me tonight. Josh's face fell, and he shook his head. No way. Mom wouldn't do that. You're lying. David's heart broke at the disbelief in Josh's voice, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth anymore. I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. And there's something else, something we've kept from you for a long time. Josh looked at David, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. What is it, Dad? David paused, the weight of what he was about to say sinking in. Josh, I'm not your biological father. Your mom was pregnant with you when I met her. Your real father, Mark, left before you were born. I've raised you as my own because I love you more than anything, but I think it's time you knew the truth. For a moment, Josh just stared at him. His face was a mask of shock, unable to process what David had just told him. Then, slowly, tears began to form in his eyes, and he shook his head. No, you're my dad. You've always been my dad. David pulled Josh into a tight embrace, fighting his own tears. I am your dad, Josh. Nothing can change that. I love you, and I always will. But you deserve to know the truth, no matter how hard it is. Josh clung to him, sobbing uncontrollably. David held him close, his heart aching as he felt the pain of this revelation sink deep into Josh's soul. This wasn't how he wanted to tell Josh the truth, but it was a reality they had to face. After some time, Josh pulled away from David and wiped his eyes. I want to talk to Mom, he said, his voice trembling but determined. David nodded, guiding Josh downstairs to the kitchen, where Emily was still sitting. She looked up as they entered, her expression a mix of hope and dread. Mom, Josh said, his voice shaking with emotion. Is it true? Are you having an affair? And is Dad really not my biological father? Emily's face crumpled as she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, it's true. I'm so sorry, Josh. I never wanted to hurt you. Josh stood there, his face contorted with pain and anger. How could you do this? How could you lie to me all these years? His voice was rising with emotion. You knew and you didn't tell me. You kept this from me. Emily reached out to him, but Josh stepped back, shaking his head. Don't. Just don't. I can't even look at you right now. David stepped forward, putting a protective arm around Josh. It's okay, Josh. We'll get through this together. You're not alone in this. Josh nodded, his face still a mix of anger and sadness. I don't want to stay here tonight, he said quietly. Can we go somewhere else? David, seeing the pain in his son's eyes, agreed. Of course, buddy. Let's pack a bag and go to a hotel for the night. We need some space to think. The two of them left the house in silence, the weight of the evening's revelations hanging heavily between them. The following days were filled with emotional upheaval. Josh continued to reject Emily's attempts to reconcile. He spent most of his time with David, who was doing everything in his power to provide stability and support. Emily was devastated, and although David had his own anger and feelings of betrayal, he could see that Emily was suffering. She was still Josh's mother, and despite everything, she loved him. David knew that the emotional turmoil would take time to heal. He didn't want to be impulsive in his decisions, but he also knew that Emily's actions had forever altered the course of their lives. Divorce seemed inevitable, but he wanted to ensure that Josh had everything he needed to feel safe and loved, no matter what. David sought the guidance of a lawyer and began the divorce process. He focused on securing custody of Josh, as he knew this was the most important thing. He worked hard to provide Josh with stability and comfort, and while the emotional toll of the situation was heavy, he was determined to do right by his son. As weeks passed, David reflected on everything that had happened. He knew that Emily's affair wasn't just an infidelity. It was a betrayal that shattered everything they had built together. But David also understood that the pain wasn't just about him. It was about Josh, who had been caught in the crossfire of adult mistakes. In the end, David realized that it wasn't about seeking revenge or making Emily suffer. It was about finding peace for himself and for Josh. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could shape their future together. David's path to healing was long and difficult, but ultimately led him to a place of clarity. He had faced the consequences of Emily's betrayal head-on and had made choices that would give Josh the stability and love he needed. David's career was flourishing, and he had found a new sense of direction, both professionally and personally. With Olivia by his side, David was finally able to move forward with a sense of peace. The journey wasn't easy, and the scars of betrayal would remain, but David had learned valuable lessons about trust, love, and self-worth. He had faced his fears, rebuilt his life, and created a new future with Josh and Olivia. And in the process, David had discovered his own strength. The strength to heal and to move forward, no matter how painful the past had been. Story 4. I grew up in a home where things weren't as they seemed, at least not from my perspective. My younger brother David, 3 years my junior, was always the center of attention. To outsiders, it might look like I had everything: good grades, a scholarship, and an independent nature. But deep inside, I was quietly bitter. It wasn't because of jealousy, as some might think. No, David was a favored child, and that was something I could never escape. Our mother, in particular, had a soft spot for him. He was a golden child, and I was the other son. Mom would cook his meals, do his laundry, and when it came to schoolwork, I was the one who had to help him while never receiving the same support in return. My needs, emotional or otherwise, were secondary. I didn't mind too much at first. After all, I was a quiet, introverted kid who preferred studying and keeping to myself. But over time, this behavior started to eat at me. I began to realize that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for her. David didn't make things easier. While I was an introvert who found solace in books, he was loud, rough, and wild. Traits he inherited from our dad, who was often too busy at work to intervene. David bullied me, mocked me, and used my differences against me. My height, my glasses, and even my hobbies were ammunition in his ongoing crusade to make me feel inferior. When I was in high school, he went as far as breaking my glasses and sneaking into my room to read my private diary, only to report the contents to our mother. I tried to bring it up with her, but instead of support, I was told to be more understanding, and that this was just how brothers bonded. I didn't know how much more I could take, especially when David's taunts escalated. At one point, he even told me to kill myself. That comment stayed with me for a long time. It hit hard, especially since I was already struggling with my mental health. I never truly felt safe or supported by my own family. It wasn't until high school that things reached a breaking point. David tried to set my hair on fire, and once again, our mother defended him, claiming it was a joke. Fortunately, Dad was the one who stepped in, threatening to call the police. For the first time, David faced consequences, and for the first time, I felt validated. Dad had my back. For a fleeting moment, I thought things might change. But as time passed, David's behavior worsened. He became angrier, more disrespectful, and increasingly distant. When I would try to speak to him, he would ignore me, walk away, or mutter insults under his breath. Even when I asked our mother why David treated me this way, she brushed it off. She always favored him. And no matter how hard I tried, I could never seem to earn her approval. Eventually, I escaped to university. My scholarship had been a lifeline, a chance to build a future away from the toxic environment at home. The day I left felt like a breath of fresh air. I was excited to start my life, free from the shadow of my brother's cruel treatment. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I made new friends, excelled in my studies, and began building a future that was mine and mine alone. During my second year, I met Karen, the woman who would eventually become my wife. She was smart, kind, and shared my values. She had come from a religious family, and while she didn't share their faith, she respected their traditions. We hit it off immediately, and soon we were inseparable. Karen was everything I had always wanted in a partner. Our relationship progressed naturally. We moved in together, and after graduation, we got married. But it wasn't the fairy tale I had imagined. A few years into our marriage, I discovered Karen's infidelity. It was a blow to my heart, but I chose to forgive her. She had an affair with her married coworker, and I brushed it off as a mistake. She was remorseful, and we decided to work things through for the sake of our future. It wasn't until later that I realized the depth of the betrayal. Karen had a fling with an ex-boyfriend while visiting her family. When I confronted her about it, she explained that she was going through something and didn't know how to handle it. Despite the hurt, I forgave her again, hoping we could rebuild our life together. Then came the final blow. 3 months ago, Karen confessed something that shattered my entire world. She told me that she had been having a long-term affair with none other than David, my brother, the man who had made my life hell for years. I was blindsided. The anger, the disbelief, and the hurt all surged at once. I couldn't understand how this had happened. And what hurt more was that she had not only cheated on me, but had carried on this affair behind my back, all while raising our child together. The betrayal cut deep, and when she revealed that David was likely the father of our son, I felt as if the ground had been pulled from under me. The son I loved and had raised for years might not even be mine. I confronted Karen. Her response was cold and indifferent, almost as if she were detached from the consequences of her actions. She explained that she and David had developed a friendship over the years, and it had eventually turned into something more. She justified her actions by saying that she had always been drawn to him, that there was undeniable chemistry. When I pressed her further, she admitted to having regular, secretive getaways with David, lying to me about work trips. She told me that when she discovered she was pregnant, she didn't know who the father was. She stayed with me because she saw me as the more dependable brother. My entire world collapsed. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted, had been sleeping with my brother. I confronted David next. The conversation was nothing short of surreal. At first, he denied everything. But when I told him Karen had admitted to the affair, his arrogance took over. He blamed Karen for everything, calling her characterless and insisting that he was a better-looking brother, the one who deserved her. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The truth was out. Our parents, who had always favored David, could no longer protect him. I spoke to them directly, exposing the betrayal that had taken place right under their noses. My mother, ever the defender of David, initially tried to justify his actions. But even she could see that his behavior was indefensible. My father, usually reserved, was furious. He spoke to David in a way I had never seen before, cut him off financially and telling him that he would no longer support his actions. This was the moment of vindication I had been longing for. The roles had reversed. It was no longer me who was the one wronged. It was David, exposed and shamed for what he had done. My mother, despite her tears, could no longer shield him from the consequences of his actions. My father's cold, final decision was a relief. The aftermath was a blur. The divorce from Karen was finalized quickly. The paternity test confirmed that David was indeed the father of our son. As much as it hurt to let go of my son, I couldn't bring myself to look at him without seeing David. After the divorce, I moved into my own apartment. It was a strange feeling, being free from the chaos, but it was also liberating. I was finally in control of my life. My parents, particularly my father, started to cut David out of their lives as well. They refused to let him back into their fold, and my father made it clear that he would leave everything to me in his will. David, meanwhile, was left to deal with the consequences of his actions. He tried to get back into the family's good graces, but it was too late. He had lost everything. A few months later, I found myself in a place of peace. My relationship with my parents had improved, and I was focused on my career. I had a good job, a fresh start, and a newfound sense of independence. As for David, he continued to struggle. He dropped out of college, got a part-time job, and moved in with Karen. They were raising Henry together, but I could no longer look at him as family. Despite the hurt and the turmoil, I had come out the other side stronger. I had faced betrayal in its most painful form, but I had learned to forgive myself and let go of the toxic relationships that had held me back. My father had stood by me, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly supported. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was determined to make the most of it. Story 5. I was 32 when I first met Emily, a 30-year-old whirlwind of charm and contradictions. My name is Daniel Hart, and I had never really believed in love at first sight until that fateful evening at a friend's birthday party. It was one of those high society gatherings filled with expensive perfume, extravagant outfits, and polite conversation. I had been dragged along by my best friend, Mark, who insisted I needed to get out more. But the moment I laid eyes on Emily, everything changed. The first encounter was nothing spectacular. We bumped into each other near the bar, spilling a cocktail on my shirt. I joked that it was an upgrade to my usual attire, and she laughed. That laughter, unguarded and genuine, immediately broke down my carefully constructed walls. It was an ordinary start, but something shifted inside me. I didn't know it then, but Emily was about to change my life. Emily had a rich and colorful history that I was both intrigued by and intimidated by. She had been with many men, each relationship leaving its mark on her. I learned about James, her high school sweetheart, and Laura, her college romance. There were brief flings, passion affairs, and heart-wrenching breakups. Yet, Emily spoke about it all with such openness and wisdom that I couldn't help but admire her. As we grew closer, I found myself constantly in awe of her resilience. Emily had faced heartbreak, but never let it define her. She remained unapologetic for her past, and that was something I admired deeply. But as I learned more about her, it became clear that my family's concerns about her past weren't entirely unfounded. The moment Emily and I became serious, the tension with my family grew. My mother, in particular, was vocal about her concerns. She had always envisioned me with someone more conventional. Her subtle digs about my relationship with Emily became frequent, with comments like, "Remember Samantha? She was so sweet." My siblings shared the same doubts, but they kept their opinions to themselves. Emily felt their disapproval deeply, and although she never showed it, I could see the hurt in her eyes. At times, I wanted to confront my family, but I knew it would only make things worse. Emily was the woman I wanted, regardless of her past. But as time passed, the strain on our relationship grew. A few months after moving in together, Emily told me she was pregnant. I was ecstatic at the news. This was the next chapter in our lives together. But Emily's reaction was different. She wasn't ready for a child. The weight of the responsibility made her retreat further into herself, and I could feel the distance growing between us. Despite this, I threw myself into the role of supportive partner. I went to every doctor's appointment, cooked for her, and did everything I could to prepare for our child's arrival. Emily appreciated it, but there was always an underlying sadness in her eyes, a longing for the life she had before. As much as I loved her, I couldn't escape the feeling that she wasn't as invested in our future as I was. Once Noah was born, I was consumed with joy, but Emily's demeanor remained distant. She was a wonderful mother, nurturing and patient with our son, but the connection between us had started to fray. The love we had seemed to slip through my fingers, and the more I clung to her, the more she pulled away. I tried to engage her, but she was always too busy or too tired. As her discontent grew, so did my fear of losing her. I became more desperate, clinging to the hope that our love could survive this. Emily's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would leave for long stretches, spending time with friends while I stayed home with Noah. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love now echoed with tension. I found myself questioning every interaction, every gesture. Her absence left a void, and I began to wonder if she was seeing someone else. It wasn't jealousy that consumed me. It was a fear that I wasn't enough, that the excitement of our relationship had faded. I tried to ignore it, to believe in the strength of our bond, but it was impossible not to feel that something was amiss. Emily left for her friend Sarah's bachelorette party in Mexico, and everything changed. She had been looking forward to it for months, and I encouraged her to go, wanting her to have some time for herself. But as soon as she left, my unease began to grow. The first night, she sent me a flurry of pictures, selfies, videos of the hotel room, and even a tour of the resort. Everything seemed fine. But then everything stopped. No updates, no pictures. The silence felt deafening. Emily, who was usually so active on social media, went completely dark. I checked her account again and again, but there was nothing. No updates, no beach photos, nothing. I tried texting her, but her responses were brief, and there were no accompanying pictures. The silence stretched on for days. On the last day of her trip, she finally called, explaining that she had been too busy enjoying herself. But something about her tone didn't sit right with me. It felt off, distant, almost offensive. When she returned, I was eager to hear about her trip. But when I asked for photos, she dismissed the request, saying she didn't feel like taking any. This wasn't like her. She always captured moments, and now there was nothing. I didn't know what to think, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, as I heard Emily talking softly on the phone in the middle of the night, a sinking feeling washed over me. I could tell she was trying to keep her voice down, but I could hear the conversation. Her laughter, the familiarity in her tone. It wasn't just a casual conversation. I didn't know who she was talking to, but I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut that something was off. I stayed quiet, but inside, I was wrestling with doubt. Who was she talking to at this hour? And why did it feel like she was hiding something? The next morning, I couldn't let it go. I asked Emily about the late-night phone call, but she became defensive, snapping at me. She insisted it was nothing, and that I was overreacting. But the word stuck with me. I checked her phone, knowing I was crossing a line, but I couldn't help myself. There, in her messages, I found a thread with a number I didn't recognize. It was from someone named Greg. The message read, "Okay, I'll meet you in the lobby. Is the app you said Signal?" My heart stopped. Signal? Why was she using a secure app to talk to someone? And why were they meeting in the lobby of her hotel? I confronted Emily, showing her the message. She denied everything at first, but the guilt on her face was unmistakable. Slowly, she admitted that she had been talking to Greg throughout her trip. They had met in Mexico, and their relationship had been more than just friendship. But when I pressed her further, she insisted that it had never gone beyond talking. Her words fell hollow, and I struggled to hold back my anger. This wasn't just an innocent friendship. There were too many red flags. I had suspected something for days, but now the truth was undeniable. The tension in the room was thick. I demanded to know if she had slept with Greg, and after a long silence, Emily finally admitted that they hadn't slept together, but the emotional betrayal felt just as painful. I could see the remorse in her eyes, but the trust had been shattered. In that moment, I realized that the woman I had married was not the person I thought I knew. The betrayal, the silence, the lies, they had broken something between us that could never be fixed. I told Emily I was done. I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies and secrets. After the confrontation, things became unbearable. Emily tried to paint me as the villain, manipulating our children and trying to make me feel guilty. But I knew what I had to do. I filed for divorce, knowing that the legal process was the only way to gain control over the situation. Emily's manipulations were exhausting, but I remained firm in my decision. The divorce process was long and painful. Emily fought me at every turn, using every tactic she could to make the process more difficult. But I was determined to move on, for myself and for our children. We had been married for years, and now I was fighting to break free from a toxic relationship. The custody of our children became a central point of contention, but I remained resolute. I would not allow Emily's behavior to affect our children's well-being. As the divorce proceedings continued, I requested a paternity test for our second child. The timing of the pregnancy had been suspicious, and I needed to know the truth. Emily tried to manipulate the situation, but I pushed forward with the test. When the results came in, the child wasn't mine. This confirmed my worst fears. Emily's betrayal had been ongoing. The divorce moved forward, and I felt a sense of finality. My life was changing, and although the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew that I was doing the right thing for my children and myself. After the divorce was finalized, I began the process of rebuilding my life. The emotional scars of the betrayal would take time to heal, but I knew I was better off without Emily. The journey was far from over, but with each passing day, I became stronger. My children and I started fresh, creating new routines and finding stability in the chaos. My love for them remained unwavering, and I vowed to give them the best possible life, free from the toxicity of their mother's actions. In the months that followed, I focused on healing. I attended therapy, sought support from friends, and worked hard to provide a stable, loving environment for my children. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was determined to face them head-on. Emily tried to make contact with me, but I refused to engage. She had made her choices, and now it was time for me to move on. Life was slowly returning to normal. I had a clearer sense of who I was and what I wanted. I wasn't ready to date again, but I was focused on my children and my career. The future was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never allow myself to be in a relationship that compromised my values and my sense of self. Looking back on everything, I knew that the betrayal was a catalyst for my personal growth. It had been painful, but it had pushed me to become a better version of myself. I had faced the darkest parts of my life and come out stronger on the other side. My children were my priority, and I would do everything in my power to ensure they had the love and support they deserved. Life after the divorce wasn't easy, but it was mine to live. And with each day that passed, I found peace in knowing that I had done the right thing. The divorce was finalized, but that didn't mean everything was automatically better. Life after separation was a messy process, filled with adjustments and new boundaries. I had primary custody of Noah, and we settled into a new rhythm. Our mornings were filled with the usual chaos. Breakfast, getting dressed, and making sure Noah made it to school on time. But now it had a new sense of purpose. As we navigated our days, I realized that the process of rebuilding wasn't just about me finding peace, but about Noah finding his footing in this new world. I worked hard to maintain stability for him, ensuring that the shift from living with both parents to just me didn't shake his sense of security. After Emily left, the house felt emptier than I had expected. The absence of her presence, while a relief in many ways, left a void. There were times when I'd see something that reminded me of her, an item we had bought together, a piece of jewelry she had left behind, and I'd feel that sharp pang of sadness. The hardest part, however, was dealing with the emotional fallout from everything that had happened. The anger and betrayal simmered beneath the surface, always threatening to resurface. Therapy helped, but the emotional wounds ran deep, and sometimes it felt like I would never fully heal from what she had done. While the divorce was legally finalized, co-parenting with Emily was far from smooth. She would often make passive-aggressive comments about the way I was raising Noah, questioning my decisions and undermining my authority in front of him. Every time I tried to have a conversation about the future of our child, Emily would turn it into a battleground. There were days when Noah would return from his time with her, upset or confused by the things she had said. I tried to explain things in simple terms, assuring him that his mother and I loved him and would always be there for him. But the emotional tug-of-war between Emily and me was taking a toll on him. Despite knowing I was making the right decision, I couldn't help but feel guilty. Guilt for the way things had turned out. Guilt for not protecting Noah from the emotional strain. Guilt for allowing Emily to manipulate me for so long. But as much as I tried to deny it, deep down, I knew this was for the best. It was hard to let go of the guilt, but I had to remind myself that this wasn't about Emily. It was about creating a better life for Noah and me, one free of the toxic patterns that had defined our marriage. A few months into divorce, I began to gain a new perspective on the entire ordeal. I realized that the pain I had gone through was transforming me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The process of separating from Emily had forced me to confront my own fears, insecurities, and deep-seated issues with trust. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild myself. I was starting to understand that my value didn't depend on someone else's affection or approval. I was enough just as I was, and I didn't need Emily's validation to prove that. Life, as it tends to, continued to move forward. I had started putting myself out there more, focusing on work, spending quality time with Noah, and rediscovering hobbies that had been pushed aside during my marriage. It was through a mutual friend that I met Olivia, a woman who made me realize that there was still room in my heart to love. She was warm, kind, and different from anyone I had ever been with before. It felt strange to think of someone new, but in a way, it was liberating. I wasn't looking for a rebound. I was looking for something real. And with Olivia, I felt like I was starting to heal in a way I hadn't expected. Despite Emily's lack of emotional investment in our relationship, she was still active in trying to manipulate my situation. She would make underhanded comments to friends and family about me being absent or uncooperative, painting me as the villain in our separation. It was her way of avoiding the responsibility of her own actions. One evening, I overheard her speaking to a friend on the phone, telling them that I had been controlling during our marriage and was now trying to make her life miserable post-divorce. It was infuriating. But at the same time, I knew she was just trying to cover up her own guilt and deflect the blame. Noah was adjusting to the changes, but not as well as I had hoped. He missed Emily deeply, and the tension between his parents was causing him distress. I could see the confusion in his eyes when he asked me why his mom and I didn't live together anymore. It was heartbreaking to explain to him, but I had to be honest, even though I wished I didn't have to burden him with the reality of our situation. I sought out a child therapist to help Noah process his feelings, and slowly, with time and support, he began to understand the situation more clearly. It wasn't easy, but I knew that the most important thing was to provide him with stability, love, and reassurance. Olivia played a significant role in my healing. She wasn't just a distraction from my pain. She was someone who saw me for who I was, not as someone defined by his past relationship. With Olivia, I felt safe and understood. She didn't judge me for the mistakes I had made or the pain I had endured. But as much as Olivia was there for me, I had to be honest with myself. I wasn't ready for a new relationship. I still had work to do, emotionally, mentally, and even with my relationship with Noah. Olivia understood this and was patient, giving me the space I needed while also showing me the possibility of a future with someone who genuinely cared for me. Then came the surprise call I had been dreading. Emily called me one evening, her voice filled with urgency and desperation. She said that she had been thinking about everything and wanted to talk. For a moment, I was tempted to engage, to listen, but I quickly reminded myself of the reasons I had filed for divorce in the first place. I told her I wasn't interested in going back to the way things were. I had moved on, and I was committed to co-parenting with her, but that was all. The conversation was brief and emotionally charged, but I knew deep down that there was nothing left between us. The trust was gone, and it wasn't something I could rebuild. As Noah and I spent more time together, I focused on rebuilding his trust in me. The separation had taken a toll on him, but I made sure he knew he was my priority. I didn't want him to feel abandoned, especially by me. I dedicated myself to being the best father I could be, showing him through my actions that I was there for him, no matter what. It wasn't easy, but with every hug, every story, every shared moment, I saw Noah's confidence in me growing. He started to smile more, laugh more, and let go of the fear and sadness that had plagued him. While I had Noah full-time, Emily still wanted her shared time with him. The arrangement was always difficult. Emily would make passive-aggressive remarks about my parenting style and how she couldn't trust me to make decisions about Noah without consulting her first. It became clear that she still wanted control, even after everything that had happened. She would send long texts with unsolicited advice, try to dictate how I should raise our son. The tension continued, and I was left trying to balance my desire for peace with the reality that Emily wasn't interested in mutual cooperation. Olivia remained supportive, never pushing me to rush into anything, but always there when I needed her. She was understanding when I told her that I needed time, especially when Noah had emotional setbacks. Olivia had her own life to focus on, but she never made me feel like I was burdening her. As our relationship grew, I began to see the possibility of a future with her. It wasn't something I had planned for, but I realized that Olivia was the kind of person I needed in my life. Someone who supported me without expectations, someone who respected my healing process and never tried to rush it. Months passed, and as I continued to heal from the betrayal and rebuild my life, I realized something profound. My life wasn't defined by the pain of my past marriage. It wasn't even defined by the divorce. I was learning to take control of my life, to live on my terms, and to be the best father I could be for Noah. One night, after a long talk with Olivia, I made a decision. I was going to let go of the past, once and for all. Emily's betrayal had hurt me deeply, but I couldn't allow it to define my future. I was moving on. I was ready to start fresh and embrace the future with a clearer sense of who I was and what I wanted. The months following my divorce were tough but transformative. I dedicated myself to being a better father than Noah, focusing on creating a life for him filled with love and stability. The road to recovery was a long one, but every day I felt stronger. Emily's betrayal still stung, but it no longer had the same power over me. I had taken control of my life again, and the sense of independence I gained was a breath of fresh air. Olivia, too, had become an important part of my life. We spent time together, casually getting to know one another, with no pressure or expectations. I wasn't ready for another serious relationship, but I valued her support. She was understanding and patient, always giving me the space I needed. Co-parenting with Emily continued to be a challenge. She was still attempting to control how Noah's time was spent, often pushing her own agenda. Each time I tried to assert my own boundaries as Noah's primary caregiver, Emily would find ways to undermine my authority. It was a battle of wills, and I found myself fighting for what I knew was best for our son. Despite the conflicts, I made sure to keep the lines of communication open for Noah's sake. I never let the tension between Emily and me become a source of stress for him, even though the underlying strain was palpable. Noah was a perceptive child, and while I didn't fully understand the complexities, I could see his confusion and sadness every time Emily would badmouth me. As I slowly started healing, a part of me couldn't shake the guilt of moving on. I questioned whether I was doing the right thing by opening myself up to someone new like Olivia. It felt unfair to her, as she deserved someone who was fully emotionally available. My heart, though, still belonged to Noah, and that's where I focused most of my energy. Emily's words and actions continue to haunt me, and sometimes they'd creep into my conversations with Olivia. Thankfully, Olivia never judged me for it. She was patient, letting me talk through my emotions, and in those quiet moments, I realized that the fear of abandonment wasn't my problem anymore. The key was accepting that I deserved happiness too. In the midst of my emotional recovery, I took a step back from dating. I knew I wasn't ready to give someone else my whole heart, not while I still had healing to do. Olivia was understanding, and our friendship blossomed without the pressure of turning it into something more serious. The more time I spent alone, the more I understood myself. My focus shifted to rebuilding my career, making new connections, and enjoying life without the constant weight of my past relationship. Noah and I spent weekends together, exploring parks, visiting museums, and enjoying simple pleasures. The bond we shared grew stronger with every passing day. One afternoon, Emily called, and the conversation turned unexpectedly serious. She asked if I was seeing anyone, and when I hesitated, she pressed me for an answer. I told her about Olivia. Her silence on the other end of the phone spoke volumes. There was a sting in her voice when she finally spoke. "I just want you to know that if you're serious about her, it's going to complicate things for Noah," she said. Her words sent a pang of guilt through me. I had tried to keep my new life separate from Noah's, but it was clear that Emily was still trying to control every aspect of our co-parenting dynamic. I knew, however, that I couldn't keep waiting for her approval. This was my life now, and Noah was my priority. One night, after a particularly difficult exchange between Emily and me, Noah asked a question that broke my heart. "Dad," he said, his voice quiet, "why don't you and Mom live together anymore?" I looked into his innocent eyes and struggled to find the right words. The question felt like a punch to the gut, as if I had failed him somehow. I explained, as gently as I could, that sometimes people grow apart, and that didn't mean we loved him any less. It hurt to see the confusion and sadness in his eyes, but I promised him that no matter what, he was loved and cared for. In time, I realized that the process of healing wasn't just about forgiving Emily. It was about forgiving myself. I had allowed her betrayal to define me for so long, but I came to understand that I didn't need to carry that burden anymore. I sought therapy, not only to deal with the emotional trauma, but also to help me become a better father. It was a slow process, but each session gave me a deeper understanding of my own worth. I was more than a man who had been betrayed. I was a father, a friend, and a person worthy of love. Despite everything that had happened, there were moments when I missed my family. My parents were still estranged from me, but they were slowly coming around. I didn't want to force a relationship, but I knew Noah needed a connection with them. One afternoon, my mom reached out, asking if she could spend some time with Noah. It was a small step, but it meant the world to me. Seeing my mom interact with Noah, her warm smile lighting up her face, reminded me that despite everything, family still mattered. It was going to take time to rebuild those connections, but I was open to it. One of the surprises in my life came from an unlikely source, Mark, my best friend. He had always been supportive, but during the divorce, he stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. He invited me over for dinner one evening and didn't ask about Emily or the divorce. Instead, we talked about life, about my goals, my fears, and my future. Mark's support gave me the strength to keep moving forward. I wasn't alone in this, even when it felt like it. Sometimes, that reminder was all I needed to stay focused on the positives of my life, rather than dwelling on the pain of the past. Olivia, while patient, began to express her own desires and needs in our relationship. She told me that she understood my hesitation, but she also wanted to know if there was a future for us. It was a difficult conversation, but one that needed to happen. I acknowledged my hesitation, but I also told her that I appreciated everything she had done for me. She had helped me heal, and I wasn't ready to lose that. We agreed to take things slow, allowing ourselves time to grow without the pressure of defining the relationship immediately. It wasn't easy for Olivia, but I admired her willingness to meet me where I was emotionally. There came a point in my healing where I no longer feared the past. I had worked through my emotions, and I had learned to forgive. The guilt and anger that once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a sense of calm. I took a long walk one afternoon, thinking about everything I had been through, and realized something profound. I had survived it. The betrayal, the heartache, the court battles, all of it had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I was free. Noah was doing better. He had started opening up about his feelings more, asking me questions about life, about what had happened between Emily and me. I always answered him honestly, but I kept things age-appropriate, wanting him to feel secure in his world. One night, he asked me if I thought I would ever get married again. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment, then told him that I didn't know. But if I did, I would make sure it was someone who loved him just as much as I did. He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Emily's life moved on, too. She had started dating someone new, and while I had hoped it would bring her happiness, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Part of me still held a grudge against her, but another part of me wanted her to find peace. Noah, of course, was still caught in the middle of our emotional landscape, but he seemed to adjust better than I had feared. One evening, Emily came to pick up Noah for their scheduled time together. It had been a few months since we had had a serious conversation, and she asked if we could talk. Hesitant, I agreed. We sat down, and she apologized for the way she had treated me during the marriage. Her apology was sincere, and though it didn't undo the hurt, it was a step toward healing for both of us. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we could coexist without the heavy baggage of our past looming over us. The finality of the divorce had settled in, and I began to embrace the new life I had built for myself. Noah and I found a rhythm, and though the past still lingered, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about making peace with it. Olivia remained a steady presence in my life, and although we continued taking things slow, I began to see a future with her. I wasn't rushing it, but for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to think about the possibility of happiness beyond the turmoil. One afternoon, I received a message from Emily, asking if she could see me. We met at a local coffee shop, and for the first time, we spoke candidly about our relationship. It wasn't an emotional confrontation, but more of a quiet understanding. We both acknowledged that our marriage was over, and while there were regrets, there was no point in rehashing the past. We agreed to remain civil for Noah's sake, and I realized that closure didn't always come from apologies. It came from acceptance. The final chapter of this journey wasn't about a sudden shift in my life, but about the quiet, steady steps I had taken toward healing. I wasn't perfect, but I had learned to trust myself again, to love myself. Noah and I continued to grow stronger together. Olivia and I, though still taking it slow, built a future I was beginning to believe in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about what was to come. I had faced my darkest days and had come out stronger, ready to embrace the future with open arms. Story 6. My name is Emily, and I am a 36-year-old neurologist who finds immense joy and fulfillment in my work every day. Helping patients navigate some of the toughest moments of their lives brings me a sense of purpose and pride. However, my journey to becoming a doctor wasn't an easy one. As a troubled teenager, I struggled both academically and personally, never imagining that I would one day be in a position to help others in such a profound way. My journey began with remedial classes at a local community college, where I gradually built my academic credentials through sheer determination and hard work. Eventually, I gained acceptance into medical school at the age of 26. This achievement marked a pivotal moment in my life. I was finally on the path to fulfilling my dream, and I felt overjoyed to be making progress toward my future. During my third year of medical school, I met James, a charming and supportive man who would later become my husband. James, now 37, works in marketing. Despite our differing career paths, we bonded over shared values and a deep respect for each other's ambitions. From the very beginning, I was honest with James about my uncertainty regarding having biological children. My dream had always been to adopt from foster care, motivated by a desire to give children in need a loving home. James seemed to understand and respect this dream, which became one of the cornerstones of our relationship. Over the years, our bond deepened, and after 4 years of dating, we decided to get married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Our marriage was built on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared vision for our future. In our early discussions about starting a family, I reiterated my preference for adoption. At that point, James was fully supportive of this idea. We agreed that, when the time was right, we would open our home to a child in need. But life has a way of surprising us, and our plans began to shift when James's best friend had a baby boy. Seeing the joy that biological children brought into his friend's life, James started expressing a stronger desire to have a child of our own. Initially, I resisted the idea, especially since I had just begun to establish myself in my career as an attending physician. I wanted to wait a few more years before revisiting the topic of children. In August of last year, fate intervened. I discovered I was pregnant, something that took me completely by surprise. A broken condom during sex led to the unexpected pregnancy, and the news hit me like a ton of bricks. As someone who had always been cautious and responsible, The situation felt overwhelming. My initial reaction was to consider an abortion. I was just beginning to establish myself in my career, and the timing felt all wrong. James and I spent several days discussing our options. He was incredibly supportive and understanding of my feelings, but I could see how much he longed to become a father. He shared his dreams of our future with a child and assured me that we could make it work, even though I had my reservations. After many long talks and plenty of soul-searching, we made a decision to keep the baby. One key part of our decision was the agreement on childcare. We knew that balancing a newborn with my demanding career would be a challenge, but James was willing to make a significant sacrifice. He offered to quit his job and stay home with our daughter until she was old enough to start preschool. This decision made financial sense since I earned 3 times the salary, and it would allow me to continue my work without interruption. I had spent so much time working hard to build my career as a neurologist, and the thought of stepping away from it didn't feel right. After spending 8 years in medical school and residency, I had finally achieved my dream of becoming a practicing physician. The idea of staying home as a full-time mother wasn't something I was ready for. I respected stay-at-home mothers, but it wasn't the right path for me. I knew I would go crazy without the intellectual stimulation of my job. Another major factor in our decision was my deep mistrust of daycare centers. Having been a victim of molestation when I was young, I had significant trust issues. The thought of leaving my daughter in the hands of strangers, especially at an age when she couldn't communicate verbally, terrified me. I couldn't shake the fear that something bad could happen, and she wouldn't be able to tell us. James understood this fear and shared my concerns. He agreed that it would be best for him to stay home with our daughter until she was old enough to communicate. Together, we made a plan to make sure our daughter would be safe and well cared for in a familiar, loving environment. As the months went by and my pregnancy progressed, we began to prepare for the arrival of our daughter. There was excitement mixed with some apprehension as we attended prenatal classes, set up the nursery, and read countless parenting books. James threw himself into his role as the soon-to-be primary caregiver. He researched everything from baby care to early childhood development, determined to be fully prepared. We both knew our lives were about to change dramatically, but we felt ready. The support we offered each other in those final weeks before Lily's arrival helped us grow closer. We talked endlessly about our hopes and dreams for our daughter, imagining the life we would build together as a family. Our daughter, Lily, was born on a cool October morning. The experience was overwhelming and profoundly moving. The labor was long and exhausting, but when I heard her first cry, a wave of emotions washed over me. Holding her tiny, fragile body for the first time was an experience I could never fully describe. James was by my side throughout the entire process, and when he held our daughter for the first time, his eyes were filled with tears of joy. It was a moment of pure happiness. The initial weeks of parenthood were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and constant feedings. Despite the exhaustion, we felt an incredible sense of fulfillment. James quickly embraced his role as the primary caregiver, handling most of the nighttime feedings and diaper changes, so I could get some rest. He was a natural with Lily, soothing her with gentle words and rocking her to sleep in his arms. I was grateful for his unwavering support, which allowed me to recover and bond with our daughter. During those early days, I cherished every quiet moment with Lily, nursing her and watching her sleep. There were times when exhaustion felt overwhelming, but seeing her smile and hearing her first coo made it all worthwhile. As Lily approached 9 weeks old, I began preparing to return to my practice. The thought of resuming my work filled me with excitement and a renewed sense of purpose. I had missed the intellectual stimulation of my job, and I was eager to reconnect with my colleagues and patients. Returning to work also meant reclaiming a part of my identity that extended beyond being a mother. James, on the other hand, was adjusting to his new role with a mix of confidence and trepidation. While he had embraced fatherhood, the reality of being the primary caregiver was beginning to feel overwhelming. We discussed the logistics of my return to work and made sure he felt fully supported in his new role. The balance was delicate, but we were determined to make it work. Soon after my return to work, I was invited to attend a medical conference out of state. The conference was a prestigious event where I could learn about the latest advancements in neurology, connect with colleagues, and share my own research. This was my first major professional engagement since Lily's birth, and I was eager to dive back into the world of medicine. While I was excited about the conference, leaving Lily and James for the weekend was daunting. I trusted James completely, but I knew it would be a challenge for him to handle everything on his own. The conference was everything I hoped it would be, filled with insightful sessions, new knowledge, and reconnected with old friends. But despite the excitement, I couldn't help but miss my family. When I returned home late Sunday evening, I found James looking more exhausted than usual. The house was tidy, and Lily was peacefully sleeping, but something about James's demeanor seemed off. I decided to wait until the next morning to ask him about it, giving him the space to unwind from the weekend. The following morning, after Lily had gone down for a nap, I pressed James to tell me what was on his mind. At first, he shrugged it off, but with some gentle encouragement. He finally opened up. Instead of the tears and vulnerability I had expected, he erupted into anger. "I can't do this anymore, Emily. I'm not your damn nanny." I was taken aback. This wasn't the James the first knew. "James, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling with confusion. "I'm talking about being stuck here with a baby all day while you get to go off and live your dream. Do you have any idea how trapped I feel? How miserable I've been?" His words struck me hard. I had relied on his promise to stay home with Lily, and now it felt like everything was shifting beneath me. The conversation grew more intense as we both voiced our frustrations, but the tension reached a breaking point. The argument continued, with both of us feeling misunderstood and hurt. I had never anticipated James feeling this way, and it was heartbreaking to hear his feelings of resentment. In the heat of the moment, I shouted something I would later regret. "If I knew you were going to back out of your promise to take care of our daughter, I would have never had your child." The moment those words left my mouth, I regretted them. James's hurt and betrayal were evident, and the weight of our argument lingered in the air. The following days were filled with tension, but we both knew we needed to find a way to compromise. James had expressed his struggles, and I had expressed mine. We both had valid points, but we had to find common ground. We agreed to have more open and honest conversations about our expectations and fears. Parenting was hard, and balancing my career and family was no easy feat. But I loved James, and I loved Lily, and I was determined to make our family work, no matter how difficult the road ahead seemed. Despite our resolution to talk more openly, the tension between James and I didn't disappear overnight. The days following our argument were filled with a strange, muted silence. We coexisted, but the warmth that had once defined our relationship seemed like a distant memory. I would go to work, putting on a professional face for my patients and colleagues, but at home, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of failure. Was I a bad wife? A bad mother? James, too, was struggling. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had never been one to express his feelings openly, but I could tell that being a full-time caregiver, isolated in the house, was wearing him down. We hadn't anticipated just how hard it would be for him, and I had underestimated the toll it would take on both of us. Every time I left for work, I felt the weight of guilt that he was the one left behind. A week later, we decided to go out for dinner, a small step towards rekindling what we had lost. It was a quiet evening, just the two of us, without the pressures of parenting hanging over us. We talked about the early days of our relationship, about how we met, the dreams we once had, and how far we'd come. James was still frustrated, and I still felt uncertain, but for the first time in a while, there was a flicker of connection between us. We didn't have all the answers, but the night served as a reminder that our relationship was built on more than just the struggles we face as parents. As the days went on, we began to talk more about what was truly at the heart of our problems. For me, it was my career. My identity was so wrapped up in my job that the idea of compromising was suffocating. But for James, it was the loss of himself. He was no longer just James, a person with his own aspirations and desires. He had become Lily's dad, and that was it. The selflessness that once defined his character was now being tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't just angry at me. He was angry at the life he felt he had lost. We both needed something more, a balance, a shift in perspective. One evening, we sat down together and started discussing realistic ways to ease the burden. We both agreed that we needed help. James suggested finding a part-time nanny or caregiver to assist with Lily, even at just a few days a week, so that he could have more personal time. This would allow him to resume some of the activities that made him feel like more than just a stay-at-home parent. I agreed, but only under the condition that I would reduce my hours at work. Something I never thought I would say. I didn't want to miss out on my career, but I also knew I couldn't continue to neglect the needs of my family. Our agreement was a step toward compromise. I would spend more time at home, and James would have the space he needed to pursue his own career interests part-time. The process of finding a nanny was surprisingly smooth. We interviewed several candidates and found one who seemed like a perfect fit, experienced, caring, and trustworthy. The relief of knowing that Lily would be in good hands during the days I worked was immeasurable, but the decision wasn't without its challenges. I felt the familiar pang of worry. Was I doing the right thing? Was I giving up too much of my control? But I knew that this was what we needed to move forward. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about finding a way to make it work for all of us. As weeks passed, we settled into our new routine. The nanny arrived on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, giving James some free time to pursue part-time work and his own hobbies. He found a marketing gig that allowed him to work from home a few hours a day, and I reduced my hours at the hospital to spend more time with Lily and James. It wasn't easy, nothing was, but it was better than the constant tension that had plagued us for months. We learned to communicate more openly about our fears and frustrations, and while things weren't perfect, they were improving. We were both learning to adjust, finding a new rhythm that allowed us to support each other more effectively. Despite the ups and downs, one thing became increasingly clear. Our love for Lily and our shared commitment to each other as a family would guide us through. The tough conversations, the compromises, and even the moment of hurt had all been necessary steps in finding our way forward. It wasn't just about being parents. It was about being partners. And slowly but surely, we were reconnecting with the foundation of our relationship, mutual respect, love, and a desire to build a future together, one step at a time. Months later, as we sat in the park, watching Lily play with a few other kids, I realized that we were finally in a good place. Our marriage was not perfect. No marriage is, but it was stronger for having weathered the storm. James looked at me and smiled, his exhaustion from the early days of parenting slowly melting away. "We did it," he said softly. "We figured it out." I nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't realized I needed. We did. Together. With time, our relationship grew deeper, more resilient. We weren't the same people we were when we first got married, but we were something better, stronger, more understanding, and more patient with each other. Lily, of course, was the center of it all. Our lives revolved around her, but it was the balance we had found between work, family, and our personal needs that truly made us feel whole. I returned to my practice, but now with more flexibility. James continued his part-time work, finding fulfillment in a new role. Together, we built a life that was ours, a life that was full of love, growth, and resilience. Every day was a new adventure, one we faced hand in hand. As the years passed, we found joy in the small moments, family dinners, weekend outings, quiet evenings at home. We had faced the darkest moments of our relationship and emerged stronger for it. We had learned that compromise didn't mean sacrificing our dreams, but finding a way to support each other's needs. The journey was never easy, but it was ours. And as we continued to grow together, I knew one thing for certain. The love we had for each other and for Lily would always guide us through whatever challenges came our way. We were a family, a team, forever united by the love that had brought us together and the strength we had found in each other. Looking back, I realized that the most important lesson I learned was that life doesn't always go according to plan. But that's okay. The beauty lies in the journey, in how we adapt and grow along the way. James and I still have our disagreements, but we also have a deeper understanding of each other's needs and desires. And most importantly, we build a family that is grounded in love, respect, and the knowledge that we can face anything together. The road ahead is long, but as long as we walk it hand in hand, I know we'll be just fine. Story 7. I had always been close to my family, particularly my sister, Karen. She's 12 years older than me, and growing up, she often took on a maternal role. She guided me through the ups and downs of life, and we developed a strong bond despite our different life paths. Karen had a family of her own, with two daughters, Lily, who was 17, and Sarah, who was 12, and her husband, Mark, who worked in law enforcement. As for me, I was married to Tom, and though we hadn't made up our minds about having children, we enjoyed our freedom and loved hosting gatherings for friends and family, where everyone felt welcome, regardless of whether they had kids. Last weekend, Tom and I decided to host a pool party at our house. We love entertaining, and our backyard, with its sparkling pool and ample space, was perfect for such an event. Though we didn't have kids of our own, we made sure to create a kid-friendly atmosphere with fun activities, snacks, and non-alcoholic beverages for the younger guests. The day was filled with excitement as people arrived, mingling, enjoying drinks, and watching their kids have fun in the pool. The atmosphere was relaxed and joyful, with everyone behaving responsibly, especially with the kids around. When Karen and her daughters arrived, I greeted them with a warm hug and was happy to see that they were doing well. Karen mentioned she had to leave early for work, but assured me that Lily and Sarah could stay, which I was more than happy to accommodate. As the evening wore on, everything seemed to be going perfectly. The kids were still playing in the pool, the adults were chatting, and Tom was grilling dinner. It was everything I had hoped for, a wonderful celebration. But then, something unexpected happened. Lily came up to me with a serious expression and asked if we could talk. She nervously told me that her mom had called and insisted she and Sarah come home. According to Lily, Karen didn't want them to stay because she believed I had been drinking. I was taken aback. I had had one drink hours ago while setting up, and everyone at the party, including the kids, was behaving responsibly. Confused, I tried to reassure Lily, but she seemed insistent that her mom wouldn't let her stay under these conditions. I immediately called my friend Jenny, who lived in the same neighborhood as Karen, and asked if she could give the girls a ride home. As soon as they left, I texted Karen, letting her know that Lily had mentioned this, and asking why she believed such a thing. Her response was swift and harsh. Karen said Lily had also told her that there had been drug use at the party, and that I had been talking badly about her after she left. The accusations stunned me. I knew every single person at that party, and none of them would behave like that, especially not around kids. I texted Karen back, trying to explain that nothing like that had happened, but she refused to listen. She chose to believe Lily, without question. Her response was cold and final. She trusted her daughter, and that was the end of it. I felt betrayed and hurt, especially because Karen had trusted me so many times before. How could she believe such an outrageous lie? The next day, I tried calling Karen. I was hoping for some resolution. But when we spoke, she remained firm in her belief that Lily would never lie about something like this. She was putting her children's safety first, she said, and that meant doubting me. The conversation ended with me feeling more alone than ever. Karen's unwavering belief in Lily's accusations felt like a slap in the face. All of my past efforts to help her family seemed meaningless now. Later, Mark, Karen's husband, called me. He was trying to mediate, but his neutral stance only added to my frustration. He said it was difficult for him to take sides, and that he just wanted to keep the family together. But for me, it wasn't about taking sides for the sake of peace. It was about defending my integrity. I had never done anything to hurt Karen or her family, yet here I was being accused of things I couldn't even imagine. Days passed, and the emotional toll grew. I kept replaying the events in my mind. I had always been the one Karen turned to when she needed help with Lily's rebellious behavior. I had spent countless hours helping her and Mark with their daughters, yet now it seemed like none of that mattered. My reputation, my trustworthiness, everything had been called into question because of one teenager's lie. Then I remembered the security cameras we had installed around the pool area. They were meant for safety during gatherings, but now they could serve another purpose. I rushed to the living room, where the footage was stored, and started reviewing it with Tom. As the video played, my heart raced with hope and anxiety. I watched as the party unfolded, just as I remembered. Kids playing in the pool, adults enjoying drinks, and no signs of anyone misbehaving. The footage clearly disproved Lily's accusations. There was no drinking, no smoking, no inappropriate behavior. I felt a surge of relief, but also anger. This was the proof I needed to clear my name. I transferred irrelevant clips to a USB drive and made plans to meet Karen and Mark the next day. When they arrived at my house, I handed the USB drive to Tom, who connected it to the TV. As the footage played, I watched their faces closely. They were both visibly shocked as the truth sank in. The video left no room for doubt. Everything Lily had claimed was false. The accusations were baseless and harmful, and I couldn't understand why Karen hadn't trusted me. Finally, Karen spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "I didn't expect this." I could hear the shock in her voice, and I felt a mixture of frustration and sadness. Mark, always the calm one, sighed deeply. "We need to talk to Lily," he said, his voice troubled. As they left, promising to address the situation with Lily, I felt a mix of relief and lingering sadness. The evidence was irrefutable, but the emotional damage had already been done. Trust had been broken, and I wasn't sure how long it would take to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. In the days that followed, I reflected on everything I had done for Karen and her family over the years, the countless times I had helped, supported, and protected them. Now, it felt like all of that was forgotten, replaced by a lie and a sister who couldn't see beyond her daughter's accusations. The truth had finally been revealed, but I wasn't sure if it would be enough to heal the rift between us. For now, all I could do was wait, hoping that the truth would finally bring some understanding and reconciliation.